What is artificial difficulty or fake difficulty in video games? Well, to answer that, we need to do a real deep dive into what difficulty really is and how it really affects the games you play. And man, if you think difficulty is only just how much health enemies get, then maybe this video will help open your mind to what makes a game truly difficult. Developers can tweak a number of parameters within their game to make it more or less challenging, such as enemy health, enemy damage, enemy frequency, player damage, frequency of items, adding or removing game mechanics, increasing or decreasing reaction windows. The list goes on and on. These are normally broken down into different difficulty levels. Depending on the game, it may tell you some of the things that are changed from level to level, or it may just give you a general description of who the difficulty is aimed for. You have the novice difficulty for people who want to just play the game and enjoy the mechanics and story without much pushback at all. The normal difficulty, which is probably the way the devs intended for the game to be experienced. The hard difficulty for people who are more experienced gamers, and the hardest difficulty, which varies based on the game, which for a lot of games just designed so the enemies 1 or 2 tap you, while you either deal less damage to them or they just have a bigger health pool, while also imposing restrictions on players to make the experience a little harder. I personally do not like the approach some games make, where the only thing that makes the game harder is that the enemies gain more health and you deal less damage while literally nothing else changes. I just personally don't find it fun to make the enemies have more health just for the sake of having more health. Eventually it can get to the point where the enemies just become sponges, and this obviously will differ from game to game, but in general I just dislike that practice. I think a great example of real difficulty in the Fallout series is the hardcore mode. Turning on hardcore mode by itself doesn't actually make the enemy stronger or the player weaker. Instead, it changes the mechanics of the game to make the player play completely differently than they would in normal mode. In hardcore mode, you heal over time instead of instantly. Radiation poisoning heals over time instead of instantly as well. Doctor's bags heal broken limbs partially. Crippled limbs can no longer be healed by stim packs or just sleeping in any bed you find. You must go to an actual doctor, use a doctor's bag, or you must own the bed for it to heal you. Ammunition also has weight, companions have permadeath, and the players must eat, drink, and sleep or they will suffer debuffs from not performing these actions and can eventually die. These changes to the gameplay significantly change how one play Fallout. Ever since I played my first playthrough on hardcore, I have only ever played the game on hardcore since then. Not being able to heal instantly makes you take your fights differently, as you can't just face tank damage from enemies or you have the risk of dying. Same thing applies to Radaway. You can't be in a deeply radiated area and just pop a perk 30 and have your debuffs go away. Suffering any limb injury is now far more troublesome, especially early game, as you may not have any way to deal with it while you are out on quest and must plan accordingly to it. Ammunition having more weight makes it so you must think about what weapons you really want to bring with you, as you're only picking up every single ammo pack you find and or weapon. Inventory management will be essential, and companions having permadeath means that they are no longer bullet sponges that can just take up X amount of bullets for you and just be revived at the end of a fight. You must actually care for them and equip them with suitable gear, or you'll be loading up your last save. The need to eat, sleep, and drink also adds to the inventory management as well. Now you'll be picking up and using items you probably wouldn't even think about having in a normal playthrough. You will need to keep water on you at all times to find a sink or fresh water source to beat the dehydration. You will need food items to combat hunger. You will also probably want to cook them, as eating uncooked meats gives you radiation poisoning. Sleeping will now be something you need to do occasionally, and it will no longer heal you just sleeping on random mats and beds you find in the wasteland. All these changes to mechanics have the player make plenty of choices to make sure they aren't punished for ignoring them, as doing so can lead to death. All these things create a more difficult experience without arbitrarily increasing the health and resistance of the enemies. This, I believe, is a good way of increasing difficulty in a healthy way. So next, I'm going to be giving an example of a game I think that has a pretty bad way of handling difficulty. This would be a very interesting take, but I do not like the way that the OP level system works in the Borderlands series. For those who do not know, Borderlands is a looter shooter made by Gearbox Software, where you pick from a class of vault hunters who all have their own unique abilities and skills which define their playstyles. And once you finish the story, you are introduced to the endgame. For now, we will be speaking about Borderlands 2 in particular, and in Borderlands 2, the max level is 80 plus 10 overpower levels. The gameplay loop essentially has you playing through the game a couple of times across a few playthroughs, as you will need to complete at least 2 to unlock Ultimate Ball Tournament. From here, you'll want to level to max level so you don't outlevel your gear anymore, and after you reach max level, the endgame content would essentially be the raid bosses. The raid bosses all have their own unique gimmicks and their own respective loopholes. The raid bosses require you to be equipped pretty well and are extremely fun. These were definitely some of the highlights of playing Borderlands 2, as each boss was unique and the reward for beating them was gear that you literally couldn't get anywhere else. Like I said, I enjoyed this content and it was a highlight of my time playing Borderlands 2. Now, you may be wondering, what about the overpowered levels? Well, I'm gonna say it again. I do not like the OP levels. For those who may not know, once you make it to max level, you can get OP levels by running through the raid on Digistruck Peak. Every time you complete a run through Peak, you earn another level. With these levels, you can raise the power of the enemies, which in turn raises the power of the gear you can obtain. The whole mission is fun and all, but the reward isn't for me. I don't enjoy that the only thing that changes is how the OP levels work is essentially the enemies deal more damage, have more health, and damage resistance, while your character itself is more or less the same. And some things in the game don't even scale as well alongside with the characters, such as the vehicles. They kind of stay the same health and you can get shot. You can get one-shotted by some random fucking enemy that's just out in the middle of nowhere and one-shots your vehicle. The only payoff for having the OP level is that at the end of running through DigiPeak, you get a 100% drop chance of a pearlescent, which is a new rarity item that was added with the level upgrades. You can only get the original pearls, not the Gen 2 pearls, but that's a lot to explain. Don't worry about that part. Moral of the story, you increase the levels of the enemies for not that much of a trade-off. You don't even get to farm all the pearlescents, and you would probably have a far easier time just going to the Wildlife Preservation Preserve and farming tubbies, since they are the only way to get a pearlescent drop anyways. So you have 2 options to get these weapons. Run the gauntlet, which could take you 30 minutes, or you can kill 4 small tubby boys in 12 seconds. To me, OP levels are just pointless, as you just run around and get 2-shot to fight for your life by grunt enemies, and it's unavoidable damage, so it's not like you can dodge it by normal means. Most of the guns feel useless due to damage scaling, and the main option to stay alive is by literally being invincible or being a one-shot machine. And the reason why I say that you'll get 2-shot or whatever is, and you have to remain invincible, is due to health gating. The best strategy is essentially to hold a Moxie weapon, and when you have a Moxie weapon in your hand, you heal a percentage of the damage that you deal, and due to health gating, as long as you have over 50% of your health, you cannot be one-shot by an enemy. So you will not instantly go down, and so you can't be one-shot due to health gating. So as long as you have a Moxie weapon in your hand and just some damage going out, you don't have to worry about going down, and that's essentially what I mean by just being invincible. That was like your only option in surviving in the OP levels. In Borderlands 3, the OP level system is instead the Mayhem system. You don't need to do anything crazy to unlock the Mayhem levels either. Once you beat the game, you gain access to it and can immediately go to the hardest difficulty. I still didn't enjoy this system in Borderlands 3, as to make it far worse than Borderlands 2, they added random modifiers that would occur every time you load into the game. Depending on what level you set it to, it increased how many modifiers that would become active. I must also reiterate that they are random. This system was absolutely annoying as hell, as the reward for playing on these levels were finding guns that you literally could not get unless you played above a certain Mayhem level. It also increased the drop rates and how much money and materials you receive when defeating enemies. So you absolutely wanted to play on the Mayhem levels, as it made farming way easier. Now, I feel this would be a good example of fake or artificial difficulty. While I may not have liked the Borderlands 2 way of OP levels, it tested players by pushing your builds to the absolute maximum and required you to have a pretty good knowledge of your characters and weapons. As levels go up, you can't just run around with whatever weapon you want and still expect the same results. The problem with Borderlands 3 is that it has that same system, but it adds the randomness on top of that. These modifiers honestly just make it significantly more inconvenient for the player, as the content itself isn't exactly hard, and before they patched it out, you had random modifiers every single time you load up the game, which could be things like buffs or nerfs to your character and the enemies. Things such as grenade damage being increased by 25%, enemies having gigantic heads so they are easier to crit, gun damage being increased by 25%, while the recoil is also increased by 100% alongside with the weapon spread. These are the good modifiers. You can have one of these active at a time. On the other end of the spectrum, you can get post-mortem. When you kill an enemy, there is a chance that a skull named Death will spawn on their corpse and follow the player until it's either defeated or it makes contact with the player. If it touches you, you instantly enter fight for your life mode. Enemies can spawn in with complete immunity to certain damage types. Roguelike, where fight for your life is disabled and if your health reaches 0, you instantly die. There was a modifier where if you got close to an enemy, a beam would immediately attach to you and deal damage to you. There were healing drones that would constantly heal enemies. If you stand still, there could be a pool of fire that spawns below you and does damage to you. There was a drone that gave enemies complete immunity. By now, you get the idea of what I'm talking about. The enemies could also be an upward of 10,000% stronger than normal, and adding these things on top of it was just a major inconvenience. Which leads me into what this video is supposed to be about in the first place. Artificial difficulty. If difficulty is something that challenges a player's skill at a game, artificial or fake difficulty laughs at it and is there just to make the game harder. It's a very nuanced topic and some things are subjective and some things are objective. I believe the modifiers for Mayhem mode were fake difficulty because they're random and felt like complete bullshit to play against, where if they didn't exist it wouldn't be difficult in the first place. I think the Borderlands 3 example may be a little extreme, but it's just my personal opinion on what I feel like the fake difficulty is. But let's bring it back a bit. For a more common example, imagine you're playing a racing game. You are in second place. You have a faster car than the first place guy. You watch the first place guy crash. You pass him, and the gap is about 10 seconds apart. You drive perfectly for the rest of the race, and the guy still catches up to you. This, my friend, is rubber banding, if you didn't already know. Another form of fake difficulty. No matter how perfectly you drove or how fast your car was, that 1998 Honda Civic was going to catch up to you either way. It's designed to keep the player challenged, but it can also make your efforts as the player feel useless in extreme cases where it's not used correctly. Artificial difficulty refers to the intentional creation of challenges in a video game that are not inherently challenging, but rather made difficult through artificial means. This can be accomplished in a variety of ways, including through the adjustment of game mechanics, level design, enemy behavior, or resource management. The use of artificial difficulty is a common practice in the video game industry, with game developers using it to increase the length and replayability of their games, as well as to provide a greater sense of accomplishment to players who are able to overcome challenges presented to them. However, it is important to note that the use of artificial difficulty can also lead to frustration and a sense of unfairness among players, especially if it is not implemented in a thoughtful and balanced way. There are several games that showcase artificial difficulty. Here are some popular ones. Dark Souls. This game is known for its challenging difficulty and is often cited as an example of artificial difficulty. The game requires players to learn from their mistakes and to improve their skills in order to progress. Cuphead. This game is a run-and-gun shooter with a 1930s cartoon art style. It is known for its difficulty with many levels requiring perfect timing and coordination. Super Meat Boy. This platform game requires players to navigate through a series of obstacles and traps in order to reach the end of each level. The game is known for its high level of difficulty and requires precise timing and quick reflexes. Sekiro: Shadows Die Twice. This game is similar to Dark Souls in that it requires players to learn from their mistakes and improve their skills. It is set in feudal Japan and requires players to master swordplay and combat techniques in order to progress. Celeste. Another platformer game similar to Super Meat Boy that is known for its high level of difficulty with many levels requiring perfect timing and coordination. These games all showcase artificial difficulty in different ways, with each game requiring players to learn from their mistakes and improve their skills in order to progress. One common way that game developers implement artificial difficulty is through the use of dynamic difficulty adjustment systems. These systems are designed to automatically adjust the difficulty of the game based on the skill of the player. This can be accomplished through a variety of means, adjusting enemy health and damage, altering the speed and timing of enemy attacks, and changing the layout and design of levels. DDA systems are often used in games that are designed to be challenging, such as platformers, first-person shooters, and action games. Another way that game developers can create artificial difficulty is through resource management. This can involve limiting the amount of resources available to the player, such as ammunition, health, or items, or by increasing the cost of purchasing these resources. By doing this, game developers can force players to carefully manage their resources and make strategic decisions about when to use them, adding an additional layer of challenge to the game. Level design is also a common tool used by game developers to create artificial difficulty. This can involve creating levels that are intentionally complex or difficult to navigate, or by adding obstacles and hazards that require precise timing and skill to overcome. In addition, game developers can also create levels that require the player to use specific abilities or strategies to progress, forcing players to think creatively and adapt to new challenges. Enemy behavior is another important aspect in creating artificial difficulty. Game developers can create enemies that are faster, stronger, or more numerous than the player, or that require the player to use specific tactics or weapons to defeat them. Additionally, game developers can also create enemies that have unpredictable behavior, making them more difficult to anticipate and defeat. While the use of artificial difficulty can enhance the gameplay experience for some players, it is important to balance this with the potential negatives it can have. Frustration and a sense of unfairness can arise if artificial difficulty is implemented poorly, causing players to become disengaged or even stop playing altogether. As such, game developers need to carefully consider the implementation of artificial difficulty and ensure that it is balanced and fair for all players. One way to achieve this is through the use of player feedback and playtesting. By soliciting feedback from players and observing their gameplay behaviors, game developers can identify areas where artificial difficulty may cause frustration or disengagement, and adjust the game accordingly. Additionally, game developers can also use data analytics to track player behavior and identify patterns in gameplay that may indicate areas where artificial difficulty is causing issues. In conclusion, artificial difficulty is a common tool used by game developers to increase challenge and replayability of their games. This can be achieved through a variety of means, including DDA systems, resource management, level design, and enemy behavior. However, it is important to balance the use of artificial difficulty with the potential negatives it can have on player engagement and enjoyment. By carefully considering the implementation of artificial difficulty and soliciting feedback from players, game developers can create games that are challenging and rewarding for all. Hey, thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed the video, I would really appreciate you leaving a like. And if you're interested in more gaming discussion topics, I'll have a playlist that'll pop up on the screen, and you can check that out for different topics that I covered on the channel already. And if you have anything like, you want to yell at me in the comments that I said this and this is wrong, or, you've never heard of artificial difficulty before, and, or maybe what your definition of an artificially difficult game is, or a mechanic, things like that, let's talk about it down in the comment section below. I'll be down there talking with you guys. I'm just interested to hear what you guys have to say about it, and maybe I told you something that you might have never heard, you might have never known about in this video. But yeah, I appreciate you for watching the video and sticking through this far. You guys have a good rest of your day, night, whatever it is.